Hello everyone and welcome back to another video here at the Intent Hockey channel. Today we've got a few things to discuss, including a couple of entry-level contract signings again, some more injury updates from around the NHL, and my opinion on all of the recent expansion rumors that have been going on around the NHL. We'll do all of that coming up right now. Hello and welcome to another video here at the Intent Hockey channel. I'll kick things off today with a couple of signings that have happened. Some more young players have signed their entry-level contracts. We'll start with Minnesota, as they have signed right-shot defenseman David Spacek to a 3-year entry-level contract that will begin at the start of next season. They'll have an average annual value of $863,000. Now, Spacek was a 5th-round pick in this past year's draft, so he was recently drafted, so it's good to see him get an entry-level contract in place with the Minnesota Wild. Spacek's a good right-shot defenseman, and it seems like he could have an NHL future, I would say. He had a decent amount of points last year, putting up 12 goals and 50 points in 57 games last year in the QMJHL. This year, sort of around the same pace as last year. 10 goals, 48 points, 52 games, only 2 points back of his last year's total, and still has 5 more games to go before he plays the same amount of games. So, really the same sort of pace as he had last year, and I think Spacek, in time, can probably be a good third-pair defenseman. I think he's still got a long ways to go. He's still got to get some more time in juniors, probably get a couple of years in the AHL before he starts challenging for an NHL roster spot. But in time, I think he could definitely be a good third-pair defenseman for Minnesota, and just another good young defenseman that the Minnesota Wild can add to their prospect pool, as they already have guys like Carson Lambos and Ryan O'Rourke and Damon Hunt. So there's definitely a lot of good young defensemen in Minnesota right now. And it's good to see them add to that with the addition of Spacek. And it's good to see Spacek get a contract less than a year after he was drafted. So good to see him get an entry-level contract. Now the other two are more significant names than Spacek. First with the Dallas Stars, as they have signed prospect defenseman Christian Kyrou to a 3-year entry-level contract that will have an average annual value of $878,000. Now, Kyrou is, if I'm correct, the brother of current NHL forward Jordan Kyrou. So it's good to see another Kyrou get into the NHL. Christian Kyrou has actually done quite well. He was also drafted last year in the 2nd round by the Dallas Stars. So for him to get an entry-level contract as well is really good. I could see Kyrou in the next year or two probably make the NHL. He probably still has to do another year of juniors, maybe another year in the AHL. So definitely still not ready as of right now, but in a year or two I could see him challenge for an NHL spot. I think Kyrou has done well enough to probably earn an NHL spot in a couple of years' time, and so I don't think it's too surprising to see him get his NHL contract. Last year, he had a pretty good season, putting up 18 goals and 60 points in 68 games. This year's done even better, putting up 18 goals and 70 points in 58 games. So Kyrou's definitely done absolutely amazing over in the OHL, and he should definitely be one of the better defensive prospects the Stars have up and coming in their system. So I think signing Kyrou to his entry-level contract, really good for the Stars. I expect him to continue to do really well in juniors for now. Maybe another year in juniors, maybe a year in the AHL. But in a year or two time, I do think Kyrou is going to be challenging for at least a third-pair role with the Dallas Stars. So to get him under contract is really good. And I expect Kyrou to continue to play well and push to eventually get into the NHL. And lastly here with the Columbus Blue Jackets, they signed another right-handed defenseman. This one is Kyrou and Ceulemans. They signed Ceulemans to a 3-year entry-level contract that will have an average annual value of $925,000 and will begin at the start of next season. Now, Ceulemans was a 1st-round pick back in 2021, and he's been playing over in college, over in the NCAA. So he had been playing over in college for a little bit, so not too surprising that he waited a year before he signed his entry-level contract. But now that his season's done over in college, he's now signed. So good to see Ceulemans into the lineup. I expect him to continue to do really well. In that 2021 draft, the Jackets had 3 first-round picks. They've already had their first 2 of those first-round picks make it into the NHL. Sillinger was 12th overall in that draft. Kent Johnson was 5th. So both these guys are good top 9 forwards at the moment right now in the Jackets organization. And I expect Ceulemans to maybe start the next year in the AHL, maybe get some more AHL action right now. But in time, I do think he's going to be a really good top 4 defenseman for the Jackets. So maybe not this upcoming season, but the next season, Ceulemans, I think, could wind up being an NHL defenseman for the Jackets. So I would definitely think that Ceulemans is going to make the NHL at some point in the near future. Maybe not next year, maybe the year after, but I think in time he'll definitely be a really solid top 4 defenseman for the Jackets, and will join Sillinger and Johnson as really good first-round picks from that 2021 draft. So good to see him get his entry-level contract. Maybe he gets a shot in the NHL this year with the Jackets having a little bit of a depleted blue line still due to injuries. So I think that's possible. But at least, again, signed to his entry-level contract is good. And hopefully Ceulemans can show that he can be a really good top 4 defenseman in the NHL. So hopefully these guys can maybe get a shot at the NHL late before the season ends. But I think all three of these guys have a really decent chance of being good, at least third pair defensemen, if not second pair defensemen, at some point in the future for these three teams. Now that's all the signings I'm going to get to. Next we'll go over to the injury update part of the video. We'll start with the Carolina Hurricanes, as they've had a couple of bad injury updates. First, Jalen Chatfield is out right now with an upper body injury, and he's going to be out for an unknown period of time. Now, for the Canes, they have a really deep defensive core. They got Shane Goss to spare before the deadline, so that really helps them. They have an amazing top 4 with guys like Burns, Slave, and Shea Pesci. And now with Goss to spare, they have a little bit more added depth. They still have a guy like Calvin Nahan, so losing Chatfield isn't overly great. He's actually was playing really well in a third pair role this year, and shown that he has definitely grown into a third pair role. But losing him is not overly important. Losing him for an unknown period of time really makes it hard to determine when he's going to be back. But hopefully he's not out for too long, and he can be back within the next week for the Canes. But definitely not good to see Chatfield go down, and it does deplete their defense a little bit, but they do have the guys to make do without him for now. You have Antti Ranta, who is day-to-day right now with a groin injury. Due to this, the Carolina Hurricanes called up Pyotr Kochetkov. So, once again, not overly significant for the Canes. They have a really good third stringer in Kochetkov, who I think should be at least the backup next year. So it doesn't surprise me at all that Kochetkov was able to be called up and got into a little bit of game action. It's only day-to-day, so hopefully Ranta can recover in the next game or two, maybe week, and return to game action. But not good to lose their backup, and hopefully Ranta can get back in the near future. But I think they're okay right now with Anderson, Kochetkov, and net. But the big injury for the Carolina Hurricanes was Andrei Svechnikov. Now, Svechnikov has a knee injury, and he's going to be out indefinitely, and there's a lot of speculation out there that it's going to be a torn ACL, and he is going to need some sort of season-ending surgery that's going to keep him out for the playoffs. And that would be a huge blow to the Canes. Svechnikov is probably one of the Canes' best players. He's a really good top 6 forward. They're leaders on the offensive side, and losing him for any significant period of time is bad, but possibly losing him for the rest of the season is even worse. So absolutely not great for the Hurricanes. I would expect they're trying to get second and third opinions, but it does look right now like he's going to possibly have season-ending surgery. So not great news for Svechnikov. Hopefully he can find a way to not have season-ending surgery and maybe get back for the playoffs, but at this point in time it doesn't look good for Svechnikov. So hopefully he gets some sort of a second opinion. Maybe he doesn't have to go for season-ending surgery, but it is possible, the way it looks right now, that Svechnikov could be done for a season. That would be a huge blow to the Carolina Hurricanes' playoff chances. So definitely bad news for the Canes to lose Chatfield for a little bit and Ranta for a little bit, but they have the depth to make do without those two players. But losing Svechnikov for possibly a season is going to be absolutely awful for the Canes if he doesn't indeed have to get season-ending surgery. Next, with the LA Kings, they've gotten some good and bad news, as they were able to activate Trevor Moore off of injury reserve and get him back into game action. But Kevin Fiala and Sean Durzi are both out right now due to injuries. So for Moore, he had missed about 2 weeks due to upper body injury. He had been placed on injury reserve, but now he's back off of injury reserve and he's doing really well. So good to see Moore get back. I know he missed a big chunk of time in the middle of the season due to another injury, so good to see him get back into game action. He's definitely dealt with a lot of injuries this year. Hopefully he can stay healthy. He's a really good middle 6 forward for the Kings, and losing him for any significant period of time was not great. So hopefully he can stay healthy and continue to be a really good piece for that middle 6 for LA. Then over with Sean Durzi, he has an undisclosed injury and is going to be out for an unknown period of time. So really, really hard to pinpoint when Durzi should be back and what Durzi's injury is. Hopefully it's not overly long and he's only out for like maybe a week or two. And the fact it is an injury that's going to be out for an unknown period of time, it does make it really hard to pinpoint when he should be back. So hopefully he can be back in the next game or two for the Kings and he's not out for overly long, but definitely bad news for Durzi. And finally with Kevin Fiala, he has a lower body injury and is out day-to-day right now. So not great news for Fiala. Fiala's been a really good top 9 forward for the Kings over the past little while, and he's already missed a game. So hopefully he's back in the next game or two. This is only day-to-day, so hopefully it's not overly long that Fiala's going to be out for. But I definitely do think this is a big blow to the LA Kings forward group. So bad news to lose Fiala for any significant period of time, but hopefully because it's day-to-day, he's not overly long. Also bad news to lose Jersey, as it does weaken their defensive core a little bit. But getting more back in that top 6 is a really big win for the LA Kings. And I'll expect more to help offset the injury to Fiala, and LA should be able to make do without guys like Fiala and Jersey for at least the time being. Next is the Islanders. They have had an injury and an activation, as they were able to activate Kyle Clutterbuck off of injury reserve and get him back into game action, but Otto Koivula has suffered an injury and is out with it day-to-day. So for Clutterbuck, he had missed almost 2 months due to a upper body injury. He'd been out since like mid-January due to his injury. So good to see him finally get back into game action. Clutterbuck's a really good fourth line forward for the Islanders. He's definitely done a lot really well over the past few seasons playing on that fourth line with the Islanders. So to see him go down was not really great, but the Islanders sort of boosted their depth a little bit, getting guys like Pierre Engvall and Bo Horvat before the deadline. So they were able to make do without a guy like Clutterbuck, but to see him get back is good. They still have a lot of forward injuries with guys like Jean-Gabriel Pageau, Oliver Wahlstrom, Matthew Barzal, so there's still a lot of injuries for the New York Islanders. So hopefully those guys can start coming back and be healthy. But at the very least, it's really good to see that Cal Clutterbuck is able to get back and is healthy. So good to see them get another forward back into the lineup. As for Koivula, he had been called up due to some of those injuries. He's currently out with a lower body injury day-to-day right now, so hopefully it's not too long. Koivula could probably be sent down to the minors after he's healthy, so hopefully he's not out too long. He's a good bottom 6 forward right now, but mostly an AHL forward, so hopefully he's not out for an overly long period of time and he can get back in the next game or two for the Islanders. But definitely good to see Clutterbuck get back after a long absence due to upper body injury, but not good to see Koivula go down. Hopefully he can return in the next game or two. And lastly, with the Ottawa Senators, they have had 3 injury updates. First, with Cam Talbot, he suffered an upper body injury and is going to be out for the next 2 to 3 weeks. So, not great news for the Senators. They had already lost Anton Forsberg for the season due to a couple of knee injuries. So, losing Forsberg for the season was not great, but that gave Talbot the starter's role. Talbot's definitely done really good since he recovered from his injury. But now he's going to be out for the next 3 weeks as well. So, not great news. Talbot's a really good starting goaltender for the Sens. And losing him leaves them with a couple of young guys in Mads Sogard and Kevin Mandolese as their goalies right now. So, not great news. And hopefully Talbot can get back in the near future. Ottawa's still in the thick of a playoff race. So, they are losing some ground. So, getting a guy like Talbot back would be big. But for now, he's currently out, and they just have to hope that he can get back in the near future. Mathieu Joseph, a good middle 6 winger, has a lower body injury, and he's going to be out for an unknown period of time. So not great news for the Sens there. Joseph's a really good top 9 forward. He's definitely a really good player for Ottawa, and I expect him to continue to do really well. But losing him is not going to be great. He's out for an unknown period of time, so it's really hard to pinpoint when he could be back. And he is a really good middle 6 forward, so hopefully he's not out too long and he can get back in the near future, but it wouldn't surprise me if he was out like a week or two. And lastly, with Tyler Boucher. Now, Boucher has been playing over in the OHL. He's a really good Sens prospect, but he suffered a shoulder injury that's going to keep him out for the next 4 months. So that's really awful for Boucher. That will halt his development for now in the juniors, and he'll probably miss the rest of the season. So really bad news for Boucher to be out with a shoulder injury for now. And hopefully he recovers in the near future and get back into game action in the OHL, but definitely not great news to see Boucher go down. So hopefully Joseph can get back in the near future, as can Talbot, as the Sens team is really pushing hard for a playoff spot and trying to contend with some of those other teams for a wildcard spot. And not good news for youngster Boucher to go out. And hopefully all these guys can get back in the not too distant future and help the Sens for a playoff push and get back into game action in juniors. So that's all the injury updates I want to talk about for today. Next, we go over to the expansion rumors. Now, there have been a lot of talk recently about NHL Expansion, and I just want to give my thoughts on the situations and stuff. So, it all started about a week and a half ago when ESPN people, Kevin Weeks and John Buccigross, both sent out cryptic tweets on Twitter, both suggesting that Atlanta and Houston would be the 33rd and 34th team in the NHL. Now, there's been a lot of talks since then about NHL expansions. We've seen Elliot Friedman talk about it on his blog and his podcast. We've seen Frank Seravalli talk with Bill Daly about this. We've seen Anthony Strickland talk to an NHL source about this as well, and there's a lot of things to cover here. So first, it does sound like the NHL is trying to throw some sort of cold water on this. From what some of those NHL sources were saying, it's sort of like they're not currently looking to expand, and there's nothing to say that Houston and Atlanta are the front runners, but it does seem like there is some other at least expressing interest in trying to bring an expansion to their city. So it doesn't seem like Houston and Atlanta are the only ones, and I'll get to that in a second. But first, I wanted to talk about some of the downsides to potential expansions. Now, for me, I am a very big fan of expansions. I like to see the cities get new NHL teams. I like to see the logos and the team jerseys develop. I like to see how the team's constructed. I love to see how they go from like a team that doesn't have any players to a Stanley Cup contender like Vegas. So I'm definitely one who does like expansions. I really did like how Vegas and Seattle entered the league, and I would not be against more expansion. So that's just my opinion. But I have seen a couple of other people say they're not really for NHL expansion. The two most things I've seen people say they're against would be the balance of divisions and the rosters. Now, for the balance of divisions, we currently have 32 teams in the NHL, really balanced, 16 teams in each conference, 8 teams in all 4 divisions, 8 teams make the playoffs from each side, 8 teams miss the playoffs from each side, so it's a really balanced system right now. And if you add a team like a Houston and Atlanta, that really throws everything off balance. So I can definitely see why some people would not want to expand with the balancing of divisions and conferences right now. But I think that's something that the NHL would be willing to overlook. Now, is it possibly a little bit too soon? I mean, it took like 7 to 8 years to get from that new wildcard format where we had 16 Eastern teams and 14 Western teams to have a balanced league. So is it a little bit too soon to think about an expansion? Maybe. But I definitely think that maybe in time, if they were to go to 34 teams, maybe they would then consider going to 36 teams. And maybe then we would have a balance of like 9 teams in each division, 18 teams in each conference. So maybe that's what the NHL could do eventually. I'm not saying they will, but I think that's possibly their solution for the imbalance of possible divisions, where you'd have one division with 9 teams and one division with 8 teams. But I definitely do see why some people would not want to expand with the balance we have in the conferences and divisions right now. And I would definitely think that would probably be one of the bigger problems for the NHL. As for the rosters, some say that if they add more expansion teams, the rosters will be watered down and it won't be as much talent and depth on their teams. And to some extent I can see that, but not to the full extent. I think there's definitely a couple of good players playing in the AHL who could easily play in the NHL. So if there were a couple of players taken off of a NHL team from expansion, I would definitely think there would still be enough to be not only make a competitive roster, but still have some pretty good depth. So I don't think that's as big of a concern, at least in my opinion, that the rosters will be watered down if they were to do a couple more expansion teams. To some extent, maybe there's a little bit less depth, but I definitely think they wouldn't be as watered down as some people have said. So I think probably the division realignment stuff would be my biggest concern if they were to expand. But I definitely think that the NHL will be willing to possibly try and fix that at a later date and just run with 34 teams at the current point if they were to expand. And I definitely think that the rosters wouldn't really be watered down. So that's just my opinion. Now, when Frank Seravalli talked to the Deputy Commissioner Bill Daly, he said that there's definitely had a lot of interest in possibly expanding, and that Houston and Atlanta were not the front runners and were not the only teams interested. So what other cities could be interested in a sort of expansion? There are 4 other cities, in my opinion, who I think could be home to NHL expansion teams who would make sense. That would be Quebec City, a Toronto or Hamilton team, a Portland team, or a Kansas City team. Now, for Quebec City, I would love to see them go back there. I'm one of the fact that I would rather see a Quebec City team than an Atlanta team. And I think that going back to Quebec is just, my opinion, the better solution. And I think they're the best on the eastern side to try and get an expansion. But it just doesn't seem like the NHL really wants to go to Canada right now. Even though the Quebec has a NHL-ready arena and they could definitely do really well. I just think that as of right now, the NHL might be looking at Quebec as like, it's in Canada, so the Canadian dollar is not overly great right now. and they have a smaller market with Montreal already being there. So they might not see them as a good NHL expansion place right now. So I think that might be why Atlanta's been talked about a lot more than Quebec. But I, for one, definitely would like to see Quebec back in the NHL. I think Quebec should get an NHL team before Atlanta. But that's just my opinion. I definitely think some other people would definitely agree with me that Quebec should get an NHL team before Atlanta. Toronto Hamilton. There's a few problems I think there. I think a second team in Toronto could definitely work. I just think first, once again, it's in Canada. I don't think the NHL is really looking to expand to Canada right now. And second, a second Toronto team would be extremely close to the Maple Leafs and the Sabres. And I think that the Maple Leafs and Sabres would try and veto any sort of expansion to there. So for at least the time being, I don't think they're as much likely as any of these other teams. But I would definitely think that there would be a possibility. And then I think two more Western Conference teams are more likely. You've got Portland. They have a good arena that could be NHL ready. They've already expanded to Seattle. Seattle, Vancouver, Pacific Northwest. They can add another team in there, Portland, sort of make a little bit of a rivalry with those three teams. I think Portland could definitely hold an NHL team. And with KC, same sort of thing. NHL arena, they sort of have that as well. They would create an instant rivalry with the St. Louis Blues. They would be adding another good team. Casey's already been an NHL team for a couple of years back in the 70s as the Kansas City Scouts before they moved to Colorado. So I think KC could also definitely hold an NHL team as well. But as much as I think KC and Portland would be more likely to get an NHL team than a city like Atlanta, I think given the fact that they already want balanced conferences, so if they're going to put Houston in the West, they got to put someone in the East. And I just don't think they're going to try and put Houston and like a KC and a Portland in the West and then try and move someone from the West to the East. I just don't think that's going to happen. So I think for the time being, the reason why Atlanta's getting so much interest is because the NHL would probably feel like if they were to expand again, that putting a team in the East and the West makes the most sense. And they possibly feel like Atlanta is probably the best city to expand to in the East. And why would that be? Well, Houston and Atlanta both have really big cities. Houston and Atlanta are really the biggest cities right now who don't have NHL teams. I know Atlanta's tried twice before. A lot of people have said they shouldn't deserve a third chance. Last time for Atlanta when they relocated to Winnipeg, it really seems like it wasn't enough popularity. It does seem like there was a ton of popularity for the Thrashers. It just seems like owners really hurt that team and they really couldn't agree on anything, which is why they packed up and moved to Winnipeg. And also, the roster was never really good. They really didn't do well in the expansion draft for when they came in, and their arena wasn't really the best. So there were definitely a few problems for Atlanta, but I don't think attendance was really one of the major concerns. I definitely think if they were to expand to Atlanta again, it's possible that they could do really well. So I think that an expansion team in Atlanta could do really well. As for Houston, I think they make the most sense. They are the fourth largest city in the US and the only one that doesn't have an NHL. They would create instant rivalry with Dallas. They seem to have a okay arena that might need some more upgrades before they would come into the NHL, but I definitely think that a team in Houston could definitely thrive. Like I said, big city, they're one of the bigger markets in the US. They would create an instant rivalry with Dallas. They would definitely have a lot of fans, so I would definitely think that Houston would be a very likely option. So I think Houston and Atlanta could definitely be good options, but I still wouldn't rule out a team like a Portland or Quebec. And even Elliot Friedman said that KC could be an under-the-radar team. So definitely keep an eye on those three cities as well, just in case something else happens if they were to expand. But I definitely think that if they were to expand, it would have to wait until after Arizona's situation is finished. Now you have the Arizona Coyotes right now, currently dealing with their problems of the arena. They have a referendum in the middle of May for the city of Tempe. If the Tempe people vote yes for the project to go through, then the building will probably be built for Arizona and they will be able to continue to remain in Arizona. They'll probably sign that 30-year non-relocation contract that Gary Bettman said sign with the new Tempe arena, and that would keep Arizona in Arizona for a while. But if the people of Tempe vote no, and the Arizona Coyotes are not able to get that arena in place, there's a very likely chance that the Arizona Coyotes would have to relocate. And the really, really likely relocation spot is Houston. Now, I think it's still 98% likely that Arizona does still remain in Arizona. I know for a while I was one of the people who said that Arizona should definitely be moved and they should definitely be relocated to Houston, try and get them out of Arizona. But given the lengths that the NHL has gone to keeping Arizona in Arizona, and given how well Arizona's on-ice product is and how good they will probably be in a couple of years' time, I think that while I still think it's possible that they do wind up relocating, it's not very likely anymore. And I think it's more likely that Arizona will remain in Tempe rather than relocating. But if they were to relocate and they vote no in that referendum for the city of Tempe, then I definitely think that Houston's the most likely landing spot, and they wouldn't really want to expand to Houston right now if they're going to have to relocate the Arizona Coyotes in a couple of months. So if there was to be any NHL announcements to go to expansion and do another expansion at some point this year, I think it would absolutely have to be after that referendum in May. And if they vote yes, I think we would definitely see some more expansion talks. But if they were to vote no and they could not get that arena, I think it's very likely and very possible that the Arizona Coyotes would have to move to a city like Houston. So it would definitely be interesting to see. But I think if there were at this point in time this year, I think it would have to be after the referendum in Arizona. But definitely, in my eyes, I think it's a matter of if and not when the NHL will expand. And there's definitely a lot of problems, a lot of hurdles we'll have to get through. But I definitely think the NHL has an appetite to go from 32 to 34 teams right now. And will it happen next year or two? Yes and no. If you look at Seattle, there was a lot of talk about them getting a team. Then it took a year for them to do the ticket revenue and stuff. The NHL Board of Governors had to approve of it. And it took them a good year from December 2017 to December 2018 to even get approval to get the NHL team. And then it took them between 2 and 3 years to build that arena. Now, COVID happened around there, so it really delayed the process. There was a chance that it could have played in the 2020-2021 season, but still, that's like 2.5 years after they were announced as the NHL team. So I don't think it's really possible we see anything this year, but maybe sometime next offseason we get word that they will be willing to expand to a city like a Houston or Atlanta or both. And I think it would definitely take a couple more years to get all the other things in place, have the Board of Governors approve of it, have those ticket sales to show that they can support an NHL team, and then possibly have to do new arenas as well. So I think we could definitely see an announcement of some sort of thing like that, maybe next offseason or the offseason after that, so maybe the next year or two is possible, I think. But we probably wouldn't be able to see an NHL team in Houston until like 2026, 27, 2027, 28. So I think it's still a ways off. But I think an announcement, they're considering going to expansion next year or two. So definitely going to be interesting to see. This isn't even the first time we've talked about expansion this year. In the middle of December, there was a little bit of talk after Chris Johnston on his podcast said when he was talking to one of his NHL sources that with the way that the Golden Knights and Kraken have done really well and the revenue's down after COVID, that he wouldn't be surprised if the NHL expanded, and that while it wouldn't happen right now, we could be talking about it a year or two down the line. So this is definitely really a possibility, I think, in my opinion. You definitely have teams like Vegas and Seattle being like top 10 teams in revenue this year, and you also have them being really good playoff teams. Vegas has made the season, if they do again this year, 5 of their first 6 seasons. Seattle seems to be making the playoffs in their second season as of right now, so both these teams have done really good. Also, with the sale of the Penguins and how good the sale of the Senators is going right now, it does seem like they could get somewhere between $800 million and $1 billion for an expansion fee to have 1 or 2 teams be brought in as expansions. So it definitely does seem like it's very, very likely, in my opinion. I know there's a lot of concerns. I think that the division realignment would definitely be my worst concern, but I think they would definitely try and fix that in time. I would like to see the NHL go to 34 teams. Maybe it's a bit too soon to be talking about expansion, but with all of these reports from really good sources, it does seem like it's really, really a strong possibility that they do go and expand beyond 32 teams. And I would not be surprised if they were to announce some sort of going to expansion in the next year or two. I would like to know what you think. Does Atlanta and Houston make the most sense? In my opinion, I think Houston definitely makes the most sense if they were to expand. I would definitely say that Quebec would probably be second on my list. Maybe KC before Atlanta, but it does seem like with the big market in Atlanta and it being US based, it does seem like they would have more of an appetite to go there, even though it would be a third time. So, like I said, I would not be against the fact that Atlanta will get an NHL team, I would just think that a team like Quebec deserves a chance before Atlanta. But I'll definitely like to know what you think. Which teams would you like to have in the NHL if the NHL were decided to expand again? I think it's just a matter of if and not when, due to all of these reports. An announcement to expand could happen in the next year or two, I think, in my opinion. And on top of all of that, I think any sort of expansion announcement would have to wait until after Arizona's referendum in May this year, due to the fact that if they were to not be able to get into MP, they would have to relocate. And as a couple of people, including Elliot Freeman, pointed out, Houston seems like a very likely landing spot if Arizona would have to move from Arizona to another city. So definitely going to be interesting to see over the next couple of weeks and months where this goes. There's definitely probably going to be a couple more talks about expansion, but we'll let you know what you think. Is the NHL right to possibly consider going to 34 teams? Would you like to see them go to 34 teams, or would you not? Which cities would you like to see become the 33rd and 34th team in the NHL if the NHL decides to expand again? And do you think that expanding to Atlanta and Houston would be the right move? I would like to hear your opinions down in the comments. I would like to discuss further about the expansion stuff as well. That's all I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video and subscribe. Also do a blog, which I'll leave a link to in the description below. And I can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.